Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Medlock Post. This is your host, Richard G. Medlock. This is the All-American program where we educate, entertain, enlighten, and empower. I wonder if by us playing the Star-Spangled Banner this morning, some people felt like they were in a most dangerous situation. We talked about that yesterday. Right? This is where we stand for the red, white, and blue. This program is brought to you by the United States Constitution, the Medlock Post. This is where we fight for truth, justice, and the American way. We, the people, are one nation under God. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I got to ask you a question. Last week or earlier, was it last week? It might have been earlier in the week. No, it was last week. I can't keep up. Things are flying. I've never seen things move so fast like they're moving right now. I brought up, this Superman thing, truth, justice, and the American way. And that's why it's in here. And I said, what if we started asking people, what is the American way? Can you tell me what is the American way? Have any of you asked anybody that question? I'm just saying, it's a good conversation piece, even among friends. You're out to dinner. Hey, let's talk about what is the American way. What's the American way of life? And see what kind of conversation you come up with. And I'd like to hear about it at medlockpost@gmail.com. And also going back to, I started Monday afternoon building up the Medlock Post blog at medlockpost.blogspot.com. And it's growing. And we're going to cover a couple of things on there this morning and talk about that. Today is May 5th, 2023. Today's episode is 144, and it's entitled Fires of Faith. Now, yesterday, in episode 143, I had to abruptly in the program in the middle of a topic. And I do apologize for that. I was looking at the wrong clock, and I got confused because I had an appointment at the top of the hour. And I was only going to do about 40 minutes yesterday instead of my usual 50 or so. And And all of a sudden, I'm watching the wrong clock and not the clock on the studio screen. It has a countdown clock. And all of a sudden, I looked at that clock and I'm going, we're out of time. And the thing automatically cuts off. It's not that I have any control over that. I can end the episode anytime prior to that, but that was getting ready to cut off. So we're going to pick up. I'm going to do a review because it's important, and it was about the King James Bible being published on May 2nd, 1611. Now, that's an approximate date. Historians know it was printed in 1611. And 20, 30 years ago, they came up with, let's just put May 2nd. Sounds like a good date. They might have looked at some other historical factors that were going on and says, hey, let's say May 2nd. And that's where it is. But printing of the King James Bible helped fuel the revolution in the American colonies. Well, let's talk about the printing first, and then we're going to talk about fires of faith, and then we're going to talk about how all this worked down to the colonies and even to today and how it has influenced our lives. This is important, folks. And then we're going to get into some things, a few other items that normally I would throw out prior, but I want to catch up right before. But I got to put my disclaimer in. The views and opinions of the Medlock Post radio show are those of the host. They are not necessarily the views and opinions of Blog Talk Radio, Spreaker.com, its corporations, affiliates, or any other podcast streaming services. You know, we talk about the Bible. People there might be atheists, I don't know, or some other religion. So we do try to cover ourselves here. All right. The King James Bible was commissioned by King James I of England in 1604 to look at what he was trying to do there. You had the Church of England, which was controlling everything. And King James now was in charge. There had been a change here of families that were in charge. And he wanted to bring the Word of God to English-speaking commoners. And its influence, again, that led down to the American colonies, which they knew, America had, the continent had been founded, but no one had come here yet from England that they were aware of. I mean, Plymouth Rock went until 1620, but Jamestown was before that. Commissioned by King James I, in commissioning the first complete English translation of Christianity's most sacred book, the king hoped to end protest by the Puritan faction of the Church of England. The result, beyond simply an authoritative text on which to continue building the national religion, would have far-reaching influence on the language itself. So there was a sort of a battle or a war going on within the Church of England. And King James says, wait a minute, you Puritans over here, you've kind of confiscated things and put your own philosophies in there and turn things around so to give you power. Now, go back and think of the time that Christ came to earth and he started preaching. Did he not go to the Pharisees and Sadducees and tell them that they had perverted teachings of the church? That they had perverted the law of Moses? Well, something to that effect was happening here with the Church of England. The truth was being perverted. And King James I wanted to stop that. So it gets published. And there was some bloodletting here, folks. And that's when we get the fires of faith. And even before that, we'll talk about that. All right, he chartered the Virginia Company, which in 1607 established the first permanent English settlement in the American colonies. Jamestown, Virginia is named in his honors. Now, this was 4 years before the King James Version of the Bible came out. Now, prior to this, you had the Gutenberg Bible, and that was about it. But you also had a philosophy or a process by which the leaders of the church did not want the populace to have something to read, to study themselves. They wanted to teach what they wanted to teach, and everybody to accept what they taught, so they could control them. Does that sound familiar? Indoctrination? Control? Communism? Not to the extent that we've seen it since. So it was often the book in the pulpit during the first Great Awakening of the mid-1700s that helped fuel the American independent movement. Now, Robert Aitken, A-I-T-K-E-N, we talked about him a little bit yesterday, a Philadelphia bookseller born in Scotland, published a version of the King James Bible in the American colonies in the 1770s. Now, let's stop here at Aitken, and let me take a step back. And take a look at, here comes an English version, King James Version of the Bible, which is really, even today, the most widely read printed Bible. And others have done up-to-date versions with newer language and to try to make it easier reading and so forth. However, the King James Version, that's the one I use. But when we look at what's going on, and then in 1620, Plymouth Rock, William Bradford, one of my ancestors, going back 16 generations to Plymouth Rock, they left Europe because of what? Religious persecution. It was still going on. You had the Jamestown settlement in 1607. Doesn't this kind of throw the 1619 project down the toilet? It just totally blows up all the lies in that thesis they've come up with. This theory about how America was founded. This all blows it up. Of course, the author has already admitted everything in the book was made up, but schools are still buying it and still teaching it. That's another discussion. But let's get back to Robert Aitken. And there is an Aitken Bible Society. I tried to reach out to him yesterday, or from someone from there, to be on the show today or next week. I'm still reaching out to him. I haven't heard back from him. And talk about their organization and what they're doing. It's a wonderful thing, getting these Bibles out there. But he started printing them in the 1770s. And it became known as a Bible of the Revolution because it was printed in small size so that copies could be distributed to soldiers in the colonial army. Now, the King James Bible, the Bible of the Revolution, went out and it was able to influence a lot of lives and their beliefs and what they're doing. Now, I want you to think about something else going on here. Think about world history up to that point. What kind of inventions did you see? What kind of growth did you see? Oh, you saw some improvements of the bow and arrow or how to fight wars, but nothing, no technology. Medicine was still in the Dark Ages. Science was still in the Dark Ages. And those that were trying to come out and show things were being called heretics, and some of them put to death. The same thing with those that were trying to print the Bible were put to death, burned at the stake, most of them. But the Bible comes out. People start reading it. They start growing in their faith toward God. They change their lifestyles. Their private virtue starts to grow. Their public virtue starts to grow. The community virtue starts to grow, which was needed prior to 1776 and the colonies declaring their independence from Great Britain. So all of a sudden, you start to see things starting to be invented. Number one, they were free to. All of a sudden, people felt like they were being inspired to do certain things to help progress the community. And after the 1800s, early 1800s, scientific, industrial progress just started growing leaps and bounds, didn't it? Have you ever put a perspective on it that way? Look at what King James I did for the future of the world. Not just England, not just trying to put a few Puritans in their place at the Church of England. But it opened up a dynamic with individuals, with families, and even churches, so that the Spirit could influence people to use their talents to help not only themselves, but mankind. And a lot of people would look at that. It was a revolution of science. It was a revolution of industry. It was a revolution of thought. I mean, just look at the things that started taking place, and then now look at us today. We're sitting here on a little machine with a microphone plugged into it and talking to the world through the internet. "400 years ago, if you'd have told somebody that, they'd have probably burned you at the stake as a heretic. Attribute a lot of these things to that Bible being printed, distributed, brought to the colonies, and America built on the Christian Judeo values found in that book. It opened up so many doors. Versus communism that shuts those doors. Let's go back to King James I. And the story behind the Bible being printed is packed with all the political and religious intrigue and conflict that defined the British monarchy for centuries. King James VI gained the throne of Scotland in 1567 at just 13 months old. He became King James I of England following the death of Queen Elizabeth I in 1603. Queen Elizabeth, among other legacies, ordered the execution of King James's mother, Mary, Queen of Scots, in a brutal beheading in 1587. Wow! How do you, tough times, right? I think we have people in power today that are trying to figuratively behead political opponents right now. All right, his mother's death opened the door for King James VI of Scotland to one day rule England at just 36 years old. Now, back then, 36 years old was an old man. Not an old man, but way up there. A team of about 50 scholars spent 7 years producing the new tome upon his order. The King James Version was not the first English language Bible. It was, however, the first Bible in English to have the stamp of approval on the monarchy, and the first thereof widely read by commoners in Britain. Previous English versions were written clandestinely, often at risk of death. William Tyndale famously fled England for Germany to work on his English translations of the Bible in 1524 and 1525. Lord, open the King of England's eyes, William Tyndale, early English Bible writer. Copies of the New Testament were smuggled into Britain before Tyndale's heresy was uncovered. Tyndale continued to work on the Old Testament translation, but was captured in Antwerp before it was completed. Condemned for heresy, he was executed by strangulation and then burned at the stake at Vilvoorde. That was in Belgium in 1536. His legacy lives on today. So did that influence King James I? Some historians say yes, it did. Matter of fact, the British Library attributes 80% of the King James Bible to Tyndale's testaments. The martyr reportedly cried before meeting his horrific death, Lord, open the King of England's eyes. Now, he was burned at the stake in 1536. But that lived on. That martyrdom lived on, didn't it? So let's go to fires of faith. Fires of faith. Now, this is a promotion for a DVD. This is a docu-series produced by Lee Groberg. He put years into this. He went to Europe. He did massive studies putting this together. If you want to watch any docu-series, this is the one you should watch. You can buy it on Amazon, the DVD. Since its original publication in 1611, the King James Bible has had immeasurable influence on religion, language, culture, art, and literature, yet its road to influence and acceptance was paved with darkness. Now, so I was talking about these things earlier, wasn't I? Now, they didn't put industrial things in there, which should go in there, or science, which should go in there. But international politics, subversion, lust, and bloodshed set the stage for the heroic heretics, who sought to translate the Word of God into the English vernacular. Fires of Faith crisscrosses a tumultuous Europe at the birth of religious freedom and chronicles characters central to the Reformation. Remember the Reformation? John Wycliffe, Martin Luther, King Henry VIII, and bloody Queen Mary I, culminating with the reign of King James I and his commissioned translation of the Bible. So let's go back to John Wycliffe. He came before Martin Luther. He posted only 4 items on the door of the church. Years later, Martin Luther goes up and puts up 96. Even King Henry VIII, which I just found out a couple of weeks ago, I could be related to him through the one of his wives, Berlin. What is it? Berlin. Anyway, that line. I'll have to look it up again. My mind's going blank. This intriguing three-part documentary series features more than 130 reenactments filmed in 8 countries with great care taken to represent the scenes visually and historically accurate. Commentary from 18 international scholars and religious leaders tells the story of one of the greatest committee efforts in history, resulting in the most influential and enduring book the Western world has ever seen. Part 1, Yearning for the Word Discover. Yearning for the Word Discover, the history of the English Reformation, and learn about the varying roles of Martin Luther, William Tyndale, and King Henry VIII had in its development. Part 2, Martyrs, for a book Gutenberg's revolutionary printing press aided the Protestant Reformation and sped up the printing of illegal Bibles being smuggled into England. Within a year, many influential heretics were betrayed, imprisoned, and martyred for their beliefs. Part 3. The King James Bible in 1604, England's King James ordered a new translation of the Bible. After 7 years, 54 scholars, and one of the greatest committee efforts in history, those who persevered brought forth the most widely used book ever written. And then there's bonus things, etc., within that. Fires of Faith by Lee Groberg. You can go on Amazon. It will tie a lot of this together with what I've given you to think about here this morning. Because when you go back in history, and we sit here. Remember yesterday I read The Unraveling of Granny. It kept asking the question, what made me me? And that's another interesting conversation with your family and friends. To look back, where did I come from? What made me me? Well, then let's take that another step and ask the question, what made America America? Well, this is part of it. The King James Bible was part of it. Did not the government of the United States, after the Constitution, this even under Articles of Confederation, they wanted Bibles in all the schools, so that the children, the youth, could learn values and principles that they could take with them into society, into the community, into their families. And it was a great book to learn how to read. When you go back and look at some of the writings of the time, a lot of it favors language similar to the language you see in the King James Version of the Bible. This is where they learned. Now, I got an email yesterday from a cousin after the program, and she says, I've gone through 3 Bibles in my life. She's worn them out. You don't read it once, folks. It's a constant study. And there's different ways to study it. You can read straight through, or you can study a subject. Say you want to pick out faith. Then you look up faith and all the references to it, and go to those scriptures and read them and study it. Make notes. Sometimes you can study the Bible from a literary standpoint. Look at Psalms and Proverbs and the beautiful writing in there. Look at Isaiah. Look at the metaphors that they were talking about. The parables of Christ. There's so much to learn outside of even a religious perspective. This is why the Founding Fathers put it in the schools. It wasn't there to convert anybody, because most of the Founding Fathers were all different sects of faith anyway. But they saw the value of that book being distributed throughout America. So again, go back and ask yourself, what did this mean for America then and now? We look back on our history. Now let's go back to the beginning of the Bible and that effect that it had on America then and on America today. And some of you might say, well, it doesn't have the effect that it had then. I think it's still valuable. You hear people talking about it all the time. You learn to put your trust in God. Doesn't matter what faith you are. You don't put your trust in man. You put your trust in God. Any questions, folks? I hope you're asking some questions. I hope you're taking notes. I really do. This is important not only for America, but us as individual citizens and as our families, and how it's going to strengthen us. All right, let's move on to a few other things. We're pretty good on time today. I'm not in a rush today. The Associated Press poll came out the Wednesday as World Press Freedom Day. World Press Freedom Day. Well, I didn't know they only had one day of freedom. But anyway, an AP poll came out. Now, sit down. I hope you're sitting down. The public doesn't trust us at all. That's the media. The Washington Post will be celebrating by hosting Anthony Blinken, of all people, to discuss the importance of a free and independent press. In preparation for the event, the Associated Press put out a poll in coordination with the NORC Center for Public Affairs Research. The poll sought to measure the public's trust in the news media and how good of a job they are doing in defending democracy. Were their heads on backwards? Oh, wow. They should have been asking the question, how can we gain your trust and help you defend democracy or defend America? That should have been the question, not how much you trust us and how good of a job we're doing defending America. Do you see this? Turn it around. They also asked whether or not the mainstream media was contributing to the political polarization gripping the country. The results were not good for the media. You're saying, Richard, why are you telling us this? We already know this. Well, this is from their perspective, the media's perspective. This is how narcissistic they are. At least not for the AP and the rest of the legacy media. Almost 3/4 of the public blame the news media for political polarization, and most have very little faith in the press' ability to fairly and accurately report the news. I know you're all shocked, right? Well, it's when I'm reading this, I was laughing then too, but I have to laugh now. They are so unfocused on reality, they don't realize it. They're so focused on their little templates that they need to get out every day that they don't know what's going on. Ask a news journalist the question, can you explain to me the American way? Well, they're going to say, well, no, I'm not here for that. Da, 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 da. They ought to ask, we ought to get Stephen Ducey, is that his first name? Or the Ducey, Doug Ducey, or whatever his name is, in the White House to ask Jean-Pierre this. From the White House perspective, what is the American way? I would love to see that question. You want to talk about a soundbite going out over the airways on that one, or actually viral. They're not going to put it on the mainstream media because she'd probably pass out. She'd probably slip and say, the American way is following what we tell you to do. That's just what's going to happen there. All right, back to this little article from the narcissist media. When it comes to the news media and the impact it's having on democracy and political polarization in the United States, Americans are likelier to say it's doing more harm than good. We agree. Nearly 3/4 or 3/4 or 75% of U.S. adults say the news media is increasing political polarization in this country, and just under half say they have little to no trust in the media's ability to report the news fairly and accurately, according to a new survey from the Associated Press, NORC, Center for Public Affairs Research, and Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. The poll released before World Press Freedom Day on Wednesday shows Americans have significant concerns about the misinformation you nincompoop feed us every day. Now, folks, this goes back. Even had a gentleman tell me this morning, I don't watch the news. It's too depressing. I think I said a couple of weeks ago, yeah, it's not good news on a lot of days. It's not good because the Bidens, they're trying to destroy America. You've got globalists overseas and everywhere else trying to bring down other countries and get control over them. You've got Russia and Ukraine at war, China trying to take over the world, and all sorts of things going on. But you need to know what's going on. You don't need to bury your head in the sands because it makes you depressed. Learn to get over that. Learn to look at these news things objectively, where they're coming from, and how it's going to affect you and your family, and how can we stop this. And that gives you information to stand up and speak up. It gives you questions to ask. You can't be ignorant and survive this. Back to this. The poll released before World Press Freedom Day. That's a beautiful name. World Press Freedom Day. Shows Americans have significant concerns about misinformation. The AP's analysis of its own poll frets over the possibility that more people are likely to get their news from social media rather than believing what they see on television or in the newspapers. You think? You should see my source of information, my list. It's huge. And not one mainstream media is in there. Not even Fox is not on that list. Trying to find some flowers in this garden of weeds, the AP notes that slightly more than half of respondents have at least some confidence in the news media's ability to report the news fully and fairly. Now, I don't know how it could be that high, but just 16% said they were very confident. Almost half, 45%, said they had little to no confidence in that claim. And how about the media's ability to promote and strengthen democracy? 20% said the mainstream media is doing that. Only 20%. Twice as many said the press is actively harming democracy. The rest would not or could not say one way or the other because they didn't know what democracy is. The partisan breakdown is probably just about what you would have expected. Republicans are significantly more likely to express distrust in the media. You think? And strongly influenced by the U.S. government and the political views of journalists. The Democratic Marxists put out the templates to the media. The New York Times puts them out. All right, so let's take a look at, for example, the difference between recent House revelations about the dodgy financial dealing of Biden Incorporated and the show trials against former President Trump. The Media Research Center found that between March 16th and April 5th, the major alphabet news outlets, ABC, NBC, CBS, spent 10 hours, 58 minutes, and 17 seconds covering Trump investigation stories. During that same period, coverage on the Biden family's financial corruption reports was 0 seconds. Not one mention was seen or heard. 0. It is amazing. When the mainstream media press got around to mentioning a controversial story, favoritism is on full display. When it comes to coverage of the so-called Tennessee Free, these were the free Democrat legislators that were voted out of office. Let's see. The disruptive legislators received favorable coverage at a ratio of 107 to 24 over the Republican majority in the legislature. You can browse through MRC's latest and find all this. This is a real problem. You think they're waking up to this? You think they're going to change their tune? Not till they get orders to change. And they've got America on its knees where they want it to be, and then they might change their tune. But then by then, if America is lost, there ain't going to be no free press. We've known about the massive imbalance in media bias for a long time. But aside from this rare poll from the Associated Press, the subject is either never brought up in the mainstream media, aside from Fox News, and that's probably going to start diminishing, or is dismissed as misinformation. And there are no obvious solutions being put forward. If I had to make one recommendation, I would suggest Spectrum News, and I wouldn't. They come the closest to presenting them. But anyway, get the picture, folks. It's being done on purpose to lie to us, to make us think what they want to think. All these little memes you think about, oh, hold on, we're waiting to tell you something so you'll know what to think today. Those aren't just memes. That's factual truth. And again, if you were to turn around and ask journalists questions, they're not journalists. A journalist digs deep. It gets to the truth. It does research. It doesn't follow a template that everybody else is saying. But these media people, they're not going to change until they're told to. They're sheep. All right. In our last few minutes, couple of things to talk about. It's not going to get to that one. Let me do this. If you've watched the news the last 2-3 days, or even this week, is the lid getting ready to blow off the supposed Biden corruption family? Have you seen all this alleged evidence that's coming forward? I mean, they're holding documents in their hands when they're talking about it. Here is an email that shows the cover-up of the Hunter Biden laptop was to influence the 2020 election. Here's bank records showing China making payments to the Biden family, millions of dollars. Here's a video of Joe Biden as vice president blackmailing Ukraine to stop the investigation on his so-called corrupt son. And he was joking about it. That was called extortion, folks. You're not going to get the $1 billion Obama wants you to have until you fire the prosecutor and stop that investigation. Now, Zelensky was not commissar at the time. You know, when Hunter Biden was on that board over there of that energy company, 2 former top CIA directors, associate directors, sitting on the board with Hunter from the Obama administration. Sitting on the board with Hunter. So is all this going to start popping here? Of course, the Bidens don't care. They're not going to prosecute us. Remember when Silicon Valley Bank went bust a few weeks ago, and a couple of others went along with it, and Joe Biden and Janet Yellen and Jerome Powell came out and said, banking system is safe. That's it. It's over. Not a problem. Just like in 2021, it's just transitory inflation. Don't worry about it. Well, we still have inflation. Keeps going up. And more banks, these regional banks, are failing. It is a plan, folks. It's coming out more and more that the banking regulators from the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department just turned a blind eye to what was going on in the banking system. There were signs left and right of what was taking place. Did they let it go so this would happen, hoping it would happen? See the questions you need to be asking? That's what we need to look at, folks. The next time they stand up and say, not a problem, it's taken care of. Of course, I don't think anybody believed them anyway, did they? I didn't. I knew better. I've got some bankers I'm going to try to be talking to over the next few days that are in the regional banking system. And they will talk to me. They won't come on record. They can't because of their jobs. But they will talk to me, and I'll give you some information that I get from them. And right now, it's not pretty. The ones I've talked to, when interest rates started going up last year, the one is in commercial banking. He says these rates are going up, and because margins are so tight on these projects, I've already had a couple put these projects off. The numbers didn't work anymore. He says if rates go up another 1%, more projects are going to fall off the table. Well, as of Tuesday, the rates have gone up 5%. This was right at the beginning of the rates going up. Lending is going to get tighter and tighter, and that's what they want, especially against the little guy, the small businessman and women. They want to make it difficult. Just run them overshod with regulations and taxes, and now we're going to take their funding away so they can't make payroll. That's what it's all about. Also, folks, I'm going to talk about this in the future. The trucker industry, the small trucking companies, they're getting squeezed. We'll talk about that later. We're about out of time on today. Folks, see, you need to know all this. You need to know what's going on. You need to know how to plan for this. How many of you are planning for the future on a physical basis? Spiritually too, but a physical basis. Now we're all righty. This goes with the Bible stories today. All right, so we're coming to a close here. Ayn Rand said this: devotion to the truth is the hallmark of morality. There is no greater, nobler, more heroic form of devotion than the act of a man who assumes the responsibility of thinking. And I agree. Now let me close with this poem by John Donne, D-U-N-N-E, the famous poet from way back when. No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a cloud be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if the manner of a friend's or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. And that, folks, is the Medlock Post radio show for April 5th, 2023. May God bless you, and may God bless America.